Hello everyone, this is Miss Hedger here and I'm going to talk to you about Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney. Before I say too much about the poem, I want you to have a think about the title first. So just pause this video and jot down your first thoughts based on the title. Okay, those words, death and naturalist. Okay, so hopefully you've had a thought about those words. A naturalist, in case you didn't know, is someone who spends their time studying nature. David Attenborough would be a naturalist who you are all probably familiar with. And the idea of collecting and observing natural things is something that we all do, particularly as children in primary school. You may have had frog spawn in primary school. You may have taken in conkers and dried leaves and things like that to show. Well, this poem develops on those kind of ideas. Little bit of context for you. Seamus Heaney, he's an Irish poet, and his 4-year-old brother died in a car accident when Heaney was a young boy, and that affected Heaney for the rest of his life, and many of his poems stem from that sense of loss of innocence, both of his brother and of him. Two words I want you to have a think about, innocence and naive. Similar, but have some key differences, and I want you to think about what you understand about those words. If you are innocent, you have no knowledge of the unpleasant and evil things in life. So young children are particularly innocent. If you are naive, you show a lack of experience, wisdom, or judgment. You might say that some of us have been naive or were naive at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, thinking that it wouldn't affect us. Before we read the poem, I want to draw your attention to some of the words in the poem, some of the language that you may not be familiar with. The word flax comes up. It is a type of plant, and fabric can be created from flax. It is cut and then left to soften in boggy water. And this is in Ireland. The word festered. If something is festered, it is rotten and offensive to the senses. We often associate sort of bad smells with something that is festering. Sods are pieces of turf, peat turf grown in Ireland, which traditionally is used on open fires to heat the houses. Blue bottles are flies. The jellied specks in the poem is a reference to frog spawn, because that's what they look like. If something is obscene, it is offensive and disgusting. Grenades are small bombs, and vengeance is the act of revenge or punishment. So bear those words in mind when we read the poem. Two images there for you of tadpoles. It always amazes me when I teach this poem that young people, have never collected tadpoles. And it's something that I thought everybody did. So they start off as the jellied specks on the left and then turn into tadpoles, which of course then develop into frogs. Before we start looking at the poem, I've got a little extract here for you from a book called A Kestrel for a Knave by Barry Hines. It's one of my favourites, and it has this fantastic extract in it, recounted by a boy in his class about a childhood memory, and it's when he and a friend went to collect frog spawn. It's set in Yorkshire, so it is in a Yorkshire dialect, so you have to try and hear that dialect when you're reading it. And the boys go and collect tadpoles, and they describe picking up the tadpoles and what they feel like. And then they fill their Wellingtons with them and dare each other to put their welly boots on and squidge around in them. So imagine filling your Wellingtons with cold jelly and what that might feel like. And that is what frog spawn would feel like. So there is quite a lot of sort of sensual language in this poem about what things feel like, what you can hear, what you can see. But I do encourage you to read this extract as just a little bit of extra information. And while you're in this social distancing lockdown time, maybe you might like to read A Kestrel for a Knave. It's online, free, and I fully recommend it. Okay, 2 more images there for you, just to give you the full idea of what Frogsbourne is like. So the poem opens with a very rich description of this swampy area, Irish bog, where flax grows. And Heaney describes the buzzing of the flies, the heat of the sun, and the slimy Frogsbourne. So as I said to you, very sensual language. The poem is about a memory for the speaker, and he remembers how in school he and his teacher and the rest of his class collected Frogsbourne and watched it turn into tadpoles, a way of learning about biology. And then we're suddenly brought back into the present, and the Frogsbourne and the natural world don't seem so pleasant, much more aggressive and quite frightening. So I'm going to read the poem to you, and then we're going to go back and look through the poem, and I'm going to draw your attention to some of the sort of key words and phrases that the poet uses. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of Frogsbourne that grew like clotted water in the shades of the banks. Here, every spring, I would fill jam-potfuls of the jellied specks to range on windowsills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was Frogsbourne. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Then, one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. So let's go back to the beginning of the poem. And as I read, you may need to pause to annotate your poem. So in this first section of the poem, we have this sense of a child's sense of wonder at the natural world and the beauty in some things that we might not think as beautiful. So the flax dam is festering in the heart of the townland. So the flax in its watery dam is rotting. It needs to rot so that it can be used. It is green and heavy-headed. So you get that idea of it slowly sort of rotting and being weighted down by those large lumps of turf. This is a sunny, warm day as well. So think about that heavy feel you get on a hot, sunny day. I've highlighted for you, bubbles gargled delicately, and the blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. So as I said to you, that very sensual language, it's what you can hear. So think about the delicate gargling of the bubbles. And that's as the flax rots. So it's actually not that pleasant, but he makes it sound as if he's sort of a sense of wonder at it. The gauze of sound from the flies, that buzzing of flies. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, and then this lovely line, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn. You know what slobber is? Some dogs are slobbery, they have that kind of thick dribble coming from their mouths. Think of that's what the frog spawn is like. Thick and a bit sticky. But this is from a child's point of view, so he says best of all. And then you have the kind of image of children collecting the frog spawn, taking it home, sitting it on windowsills in jam jars. And then in school, this very simple and innocent biology lesson, the daddy frog and the mammy frog, very innocent, childish language. And that naivety too, that you could tell the weather by frogs. As the poem then goes on, we get this jump forward in time. And the next section starts with that word then, one hot day. So you know this is later on. And the language changes considerably from that innocence, that wonder, that pleasure, to something really quite sinister and unpleasant. The fields are rank, unpleasant, smelly, going rotten. The frogs this time are angry, and they have invaded the flax dam. So look at how he uses the language of aggression and war in this section of the poem. Now that he's older, the speaker is much more sort of aware of the dangers around him. He's lost that innocence. The frogs make a coarse croaking, far less pleasant noises than in the first section of the poem. The air is thick with a bass chorus. It means like he can't really escape from it. It's everywhere. The frogs are cocked on their sods, cocked like they're ready to fire, ready to go off. You cock a gun before you fire it. The noises they make, slap and plop, the onomatopoeia there, you can hear that, can't you, as they plop into the water. But these sound like obscene threats to him, disgusting. They are sat poised like mud grenades. So grenades, those little sort of bombs that you throw in wartime, that's what they're ready to go off, they're ready to explode, they're ready to hurt. He turns and runs this time. He doesn't stop to collect. The frogs are called the great slime kings, like they are in charge, they've got the power, and they are gathered there for vengeance. They're going to get their revenge on him for the past when he stole their frog spawn. And he knows that if he dipped his hand this time, it's not going to be a pleasant slobber. They're going to clutch at it. It's going to drag him under. So the poem is quite literally, about a childish memory of collecting frog spawn, but metaphorically, it is about the death of innocence. On this slide, you can see there are some key quotations. Now, the title in itself is one that you can refer to. The death isn't a literal death. It symbolises the speaker's loss of innocence as he grows up. And it's not just the speaker's loss of innocence, it's what happens to all of us. The tone of the poem at the beginning is very enthusiastic, active. The speaker is really relishing being at that dam, and even the unpleasant smells, like gargled and festered and sweltered. The jam pot fulls of frog spawn and the fattening dots and the mammy frog and the daddy frog all suggest childhood innocence. And then you get that change, that volta in the poem with that word then, and the tone becomes much more dangerous. He's very aware of those angry frogs and their vengeance. And the final words of the poem, spawn would clutch it, shows the contrast with when he would collect it as a child. So some poems that you can compare this one to. We may not have covered these poems yet, but obviously you will do. So Loss of Innocence is also found in the poem Afternoons. Childhood Memories in the excerpt from the Prelude, and The Passing of Time is found in As Imperceptibly as Grief, and the excerpt from the Prelude and To Autumn. Now, linked with this little presentation, I have given you a list of comprehension questions to answer, which you can feed back to your teacher to show that you fully understood the poem and the language Heaney uses. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's one of my favourite poems, so I hope you've enjoyed it too, and I hope you go on to read A Kestrel for a Knave while you are in this period of transition. Good luck, everyone.